All right, so today is October 13th, 2022. I'm Kelly Zakovic, representing the City of Savannah Municipal Archives. I'm interviewing Ron Melander for the Proud Savannah History Project as a follow-up to our oral history conducted during the 2022 Stonewall Anniversary Festival. We're conducting this interview at 519 Tatnall Street in the James A.D. Cox Suite. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kelly. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so we'll just get started. So what is your full name?
It's Ronald Carl Melander.
Perfect. And so we're going to just jump into it. We won't do too much of the background stuff. But in our last conversation, you talked a good bit about James A.D. Cox. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about him?
Sure. So where we're here, right where we are right now, is an apartment in the last house that Jim lived in. We lived upstairs. He passed away on June 6th or June 9th of 2016. He was 92 years old at the time. As time after he passed away, we decided to kind of take this apartment that we've been renting out by the year and turn it into a themed vacation rental. And so a lot of the Jim's artifacts are here. There's 2 books on the coffee table that he wrote for Historic Savannah Foundation. These are some family pictures. His mother had been mayor of Abingdon, England, so there's a picture of her in her mayoral robe. Jim is a little boy, Jim in the army. And then behind you is a portrait of Jim that was done in 1972. And some of the furniture in the house here are in that portrait, the table and chairs, and there's an Indian cloth around surrounding the door over there that are in that picture. So that's there. That's the portrait, and the table below is the table. The chairs are actually in that portrait. So Jim had a great life. He was a very smart man. He was into architecture. He went to school at the age of 18 to become an architect. And back in those days in England, it was a trade, so it was more of a trade school, and it was in Oxford. But he got called away to war. So his education, he was only 2 years into his education when it was interrupted by the World War II. He ended up being stationed in India. So he was there for the whole time that he served in the army. He was in India. So we have a lot of things that he collected while he was there. And so as he got back into England after the war, he finished his education, and he lived in London and lived in Oxford and lived in England for most of that period. In 1962, he was, or 61, excuse me, he was given the opportunity to be a visiting professor at the University of Virginia. He had a 1-year experience. He then had a little vehicle that he was able to borrow from a friend, and he went around and saw 42 of the 50 states. And he took a lot of slides. All of that's been digitized. I mean, I have all of his, something like $5,000 or $6,000 images have been digitized of Jim's past. And then so he went back to England after his 1 year in Charlottesville, Virginia, and waited. He worked and he had plenty of things to do, but he was kind of hoping to be called back. He loved America, and he ended up getting a full-time job in 1967 at the University of Virginia, and he moved to the States permanently. And then about 10 years later, his mother was aging, and he brought her over to Charlottesville, and she lived with him for something like 14 years. She actually came to Savannah with me. Well, the 3 of us moved here in 1990. Jim was in his 66th year, or he was 66. His mother was in her 99th year, and I was 33. And so that began our Savannah chapter, and that was 1990. So he had a good run here, 26 years in Savannah. So his life was sort of in 3 different stages. His early years up until his early 40s in Europe, his again another like 27 years in Charlottesville, and 27 years here. So I miss him, but he, again, he had a good, ripe life, and he died peacefully in his own bed. And so he never had to go into a nursing home. Basically, I was his caregiver for the last 5 years or so. And we did a lot with a wheelchair, rolled him around town, and which is what he did when his mother came. She only lived 6 months after we arrived in Savannah, sadly. But during those 6 months, he would take her to the DeSoto Hilton, where they had a wonderful Sunday brunch back in those days. There weren't as many restaurant options then as there are now. He would take her to Clary's, which was around the corner from our old house. We lived at 122 East Taylor Street for the first 17 years, and then Jim and I lived here until he passed away, and I'm still living in this house.
Very nice. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys met?
We met just kind of by accident, which was a very lucky thing I think for both of us. And I was only 23 when I decided to go down to Florida for the winter, and I had a kind of a really wonderful 6 months in Florida. Part of that time was in Key West, Florida, Key West. And Jim had gone down there for New Year's in 1981. New Year's Day, so 80 to 81. And so we met by accident on New Year's Day, the night of New Year's Day, so that after New Year's Eve. And we just bumped into each other at a bar that was called the Monster, which is no longer open there. And we basically were standing together. There was just 4 people in this dance floor area. It was fairly dark. And I was there with a friend, Jim was there with a friend, and they ended up going off dancing. And first thing I heard was that beautiful English accent. And I was pretty much struck by his, I'd never heard such a beautiful English accent before. And so on my way back north, I sojourned back north in March of that year, and I spent 2 weeks with Jim in Charlottesville, and then I went back home to upstate New York. And then we just continued to have a long distance relationship, friendship, bonding. We really would spend a lot of time meeting in New York or Washington, D.C., or staying with friends, or he would come up to Saratoga for a few weeks, or I would go to Charlottesville. And then eventually, as I say, we moved here for his retirement.
Why Savannah?
Well, Jim had become aware of Savannah because, of course, he was in architecture, and he was very fond of city planning and all the things that to do with towns and architecture. And he had known her married name was Fitzpatrick. Her husband, she was a Savannah person, and her husband was the dean of architecture at the university. So Jim, in '67, as a new professor, had agreed to drive one of their vehicles to Savannah for them. And then he took, I guess he either took a train or the bus or a plane and flew back home. So he had a week here back in '67. He saw the beauty of it, the potential. And of course, it being Oglethorpe, designed by an Englishman or founded by an Englishman. And Jim was wanting to move someplace warmer and someplace coastal, and Savannah just had everything he wanted.
Very nice. So when y'all moved here, how did you go about meeting other LGBTQ people? Did you right away?
Well, we did meet everybody at that time. Downtown was a lot smaller, I think. There was a nice community. There still is, but we knew pretty much everybody. The Duncans, John and Virginia Duncan. I can remember going to a party there when John Barrett was in town, having just written the book. So that would have been like '94. And we were invited to a lot of parties. We threw a lot of parties. Jim loved to entertain. He loved to cook. And so we met everyone in Savannah, and there was always going to be a sprinkling of gay people. And some of our earliest acquaintances would have been Alvin Neely, Porter Carswell, and there's several others that we knew. And so it started that way. And of course, Club One, which I think used to be called Who's Who, and that had burned. So that, I believe, burned in '89. So I moved here in '90, so I never knew who's who. But Club One was open when I am fairly new at that time when I moved here. So I would go occasionally to see the drag shows or just to go dancing, and Jim didn't usually want to do that. So I met people that way, and then I also joined First City Network pretty early on. I went on the board, and after a year or so, they were displaced from the office that they used to use for their. We used to meet at Union Mission. They had loaned us an office, and they needed it, and so we lost that for a while. And I actually had the gay information line, which again was before the internet, in my home, and so we ran the telephone line, an extra phone line, and we had the answering machine in a closet in my bedroom. And so I used to do that. I did that for about 5 years. So, and then through First City Network and through the bars, we met people I met people that way, and then I would introduce Jim to those people.
Very nice. So can you tell me a little bit more about First City Network when you first got involved?
Sure. Well, I know it's the oldest gay organization in the state of Georgia. That was, a formally nonprofit formed organization, legally formed. And, it was interesting. On the board, I remember it was sort of 50-50 between lesbians and guys. I remember that back in the early days in the 90s. And they had a oyster roast every year out at Tybee back in those days, which was always a lot of fun. It had a newsletter that they have. I think they have the archives. They've got copies of all of them, pretty much. And, so it was kind of just a simple little organization that was easy to belong to. I think it was $12 a year. And it was, again, they had events. So they had potlucks for the ladies. I think the women had their own potluck at one time, and then the first Saturday social goes back pretty far. And that tended to be more men, and still is, because it still happens on the first Saturday of every month. And that's another way of meeting people. And a lot of new people that move to Savannah that are gay find out about that event, and that's a good way for people who are new to the community to meet other people.
What's the first Saturday social?
First Saturday social, again, it's like a big potluck sort of thing. And it goes from house to house. Everyone who wants to host it just needs to, get their name on the list. And they're actually, always looking for somebody to host it. And so various people in the community all over Savannah will host the gathering. Sometimes there'll be a house with a pool, so it might be more of a pool party kind of thing. Other times it's just in a home. Sometimes it'll be in a fancy house downtown. It just varies, but it's a nice once a month networking event.
Has that been going on since the 90s?
Yep, I know it has, but I couldn't tell you exactly when it started, but it's been going on since as long as I can remember.
Nice, very nice. Will you tell us a little bit more about Answer the Phone Line?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I mean, I just, again, it was back before digitizing and everything. So I had a pad of paper, and, I would I tried to check it daily. It didn't always happen, but I'd go up to the answering machine, play back the messages, write little notes on a pad, and then I would call people back and try to answer their questions. And, I did a pretty good job. I mean, I don't think anybody's perfect. But I do remember in particular one case where, I'd had a call a week earlier from a single mom who was trying to raise a child, and she was looking for support. And then a week later, I got a call from another single mom, gay, of course, both of them gay, with raising a child, looking for support. And I realized that they were about 2 blocks apart from each other on the south side. And so I got permission from both of them, and just gave them each other's names. I don't know how that turned out, but it was fun. You just wanted to help people. I met Peter Armato that way, actually. So Peter Armato lived in Savannah in the 90s and early 00s, and he had a pretty important job as the Downtown Development and Renewal Authority director for Broughton Street. And so Peter, he was had a government job. Very nice man, he and his partner Randy, and he had called the gay information line. So I was one of the first people to be able to realize that we had an important government official that happened to be gay. And so, it was just the phone line was just a great way of connecting people again. It's the whole idea.
Great, that's awesome. So can you think of any other LGBTQ businesses other than Club One or landmarks in Savannah?
Let me think. I mean, there's been lots of businesses that are owned by gay people. They don't necessarily want to be identified as gay businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the very earliest carriage tour companies, and I think it might still be operating, but under new, it's been sold more than once. And I'm guessing, I think it was the Magnolia Carriage Tours. I can't remember for sure, but I know that was owned by a gay guy. There's a couple of the walking tour guides, one that just sold a bicycle tour and a walking tour person. Those are both gay owned. There's a lot of gay owned businesses that aren't necessarily, out there, that they don't want to necessarily they want to be more broader appeal than just being gay. But no, I think that the gay community has always been involved in Savannah in lots of different ways and businesses. I can't think of any in particular that jump out at me right now.
Sure. So are there any local events or that were meaningful to the gay community?
Back in the 90s, you mean?
Anytime.
Well,
Sure.
Again, going back, so Mark Krieger, as I think we mentioned in the last interview, he's a real force, and he has always been what Jim called an activist. Jim Cox was not fond of being, he's old-fashioned and didn't really want to be considered an activist, but Mark certainly was and is. And one time he asked if we would host a cocktail party because we were in an 1853 townhome facing Calhoun Square, so it was considered, one of the nicer houses that was owned by a gay person. And so Lady Chablis we hosted a party for Lady Chablis. That was, again, a fundraiser that Mark Krieger asked us to do. And they've had, I think there's a television program that was filmed here that was a gay theme. So I don't know if that answers your question.
And what do more modern events like the Pride that we have going on now, or Stonewall, what does that mean for the community?
I've been watching them for years, the Pride events, and and watched as the community has the gay community is now, there's several different organizations, and Pride has really, it's had good and bad years, but I can remember it being in Forsyth Park, down on Ellis Square. They've had it, I think, might have been in the Roundhouse one year. So, it's that's quite a nice event that happens every year.
So you mentioned other organizations. What are some of those organizations that are active in Savannah?
Gay
nowadays?
Organizations?
Yeah.
So there's First City Network, of course. There's the Pride group. I'm not really that involved in all of this anymore. So, I mean, I know there are more organizations, but I'm just not the right person to ask because I pretty much I'm kind of in the background now. I also used to always wear a bow tie when I first got into real estate. I'm now a little more casual. I'll be 65 in 1 month. So, I'm kind of at an age where I'm not quite as active in the gay community as I used to be.
Okay. Well, irregardless, what do you think is your favorite thing about the Savannah gay community now or in the past or overall?
Well, I just like the fact that there are men and women of all walks of life that are living and working in Savannah, openly gay, not necessarily, making a big deal out of it, but there are plenty of gay business people contributing to the community in all different aspects. I don't want to out anyone or name anybody that in particular, but and I think that's what's really nice about Savannah is that we all coexist. You talk about the difference between Savannah and Charleston. A lot of people do. We're always kind of competing with one another. And I've never lived in Charleston, but I've certainly been there many times. And my impression is that, in Charleston, life is in society it tends to be much more socially layered, where there are the blue bloods and the multi-generational Charlestonians, and then you have different layers, where Savannah has that, but it's not as pronounced, and I think you'll find a lot more mixing of different groups, and there's more acceptance. Again, going back to the 90s and 80s, Jim Williams, of course, famous for the book, but he was a leading socialite in Savannah, and he basically was very out as gay back in the 80s, and everyone knew it, and yet they still just loved Jim and loved going to his parties, and so it's a great place for gay people to live and work without being worried about being ostracized.
All right. So would you say that you have experienced any professional or personal discrimination in Savannah?
I haven't experienced any. Not that I'm aware of.
Very nice. Are there any challenges you think for the gay community in Savannah?
Well, I think the one thing that I'm concerned about is funding the Gay Community Center. I think it's great that we have one, but it just takes a lot of funding. I believe the rent is about $3,500 a month, which is actually, as it turns out, to be very reasonable nowadays. I thought when they first signed the lease, that seemed like a lot of money going out the door every month. So a challenge to me is maybe finding a permanent home for that kind of an institution, a place where I'm more concerned about youth than anything, although I think, again, today with technology, the youth seem to be more out there, and there's all these transgendered people, and it's actually, I feel like maybe they're even more confident than they were 10 or 20 years ago. But I still worry about those young people who haven't got the support. They don't know other gay people. They're maybe have to be closeted because of their family or their socio, the church that they belong to or the particular school that they're in. I feel like, again, without me being directly involved with young people and these days, I feel like that would be my biggest concern, is making sure that those people are nurtured and know that they can be themselves and don't have to, lead double lives or be closeted if they don't want to be. So, and I know there is a youth organization too that Dr. Morey, Reverend Morey, Jamie Morey, was very involved in that a few years ago. Dan Snyder and Jamie Morey are some other people that I met early on in my life here in Savannah. He's retired from the ministry. He became one of the first the first openly gay ordained ministers in the Episcopal Diocese of Georgia. So it's a pretty prestigious thing that he did. Jamie is an architect that used to teach at SCAD. They're both retired now, but I know that I bring them up because I know that Jamie was very concerned about youth and was very involved in that group for a while. So.
Do you know the name of the group?
I don't, but it's listed in the First City Network. That they have all these listings in the monthly newsletter, and I know it's in there.
Okay, perfect. Were you involved in the Episcopal Church?
Jim was. Jim was Church of England, which in America is basically the Episcopal Church. And here in Savannah, he found a home at St. John's, where he went pretty much up until the month before he died. And he loved the church, not so much for the social side of it. He was more involved with just supporting it, and he loved to worship in the sanctuary. He loved the space of a church. Again, in his work and his teaching, he was church buildings, ecclesiastical architecture was something he was very interested in. Excuse me.
Was that an accepting space for him?
Well, again, not necessarily. We never came out as a gay person to the minister or, to the clergy. But I felt that they were very supportive of him. We had a big funeral there. Jim died in June of 16. And in October of 17, I had basically a 3-day funeral. I've got a little card here that, this whole space is kind of a memorial to Jim. I don't know if you want to try to film it or not.
Sure.
This is one side of it. I don't know if you want to You got it? And I'm going to turn it
Yeah.
around, and then this is the other side of it.
Very nice.
And that was a 3-day event that we did for Jim. And we had a walking tour, we had 2 lunches, one at the Chatham Club, one at the Oglethorpe Club, and that was a wonderful event. And this is one of the books that he did. He did 2 books that were done for Historic Savannah Foundation. So these were fundraisers. And so we keep these here just because I like people to, this apartment kind of has a story. And so it's nice to have all of Jim's things together here. You know, I have a friend that lives upstairs with me. We work together in real estate, and he's been here 4 years now. His name is Jordan Gray, and he moved here from Montana, and he is doing really well in real estate. But living here with me, the portrait of Jim, which maybe at one point you might want to, take a little shot of that. Yeah. Jim's eyes were following Jordan. He basically felt like, so that's one of the reasons we created the space, because where Jim's portrait used to hang upstairs is now a huge flat screen TV to watch football. Basically, we watch, he's a big football guy, Jordan is.
Very nice. Do you have anything to say else about Jordan, or?
Jordan is living here. He's, it's funny, I mean, when I met Jim, I was 23 and Jim was 60. And here we spent our entire lives together until he died at 92. And now it's oddly enough, or serendipity, if you believe in that sort of thing, now it's switched around where I ran into Jordan when he was 23 and I was 60. So I actually have 37 years of age difference there. And in both instances, we just bumped into each other. With Jim, it was New Year's Day. With Jordan, it was St. Patrick's Day, his first visit to Savannah. He came and it's he's been here 4 years, so I feel like it's kind of working out. And yeah, so.
Wonderful. Is there, you were kind of talking about the apartment, is there anything else you'd like to talk to us about in here? Or?
Well, I mean, again, there's a lot of things. I mean, you might, I don't know if you want to just, first of all, these are all family portraits. This is Jim's mom when she was mayor of Abingdon, England. This is Jim and his father and brother and his mother. They used to spend a week-long vacation, and there would be a dress-up party as part of that. You can get in closer if you want. The one in the back is Jim and his brother.
Which one is which?
This is Jim and his brother. Jim and his brother when they were both in the military in World War II. This is Jim as a little boy in Herne Bay, where he was born with his father holding him. This is Jim and his parents. And all the art here is connected with Jim. Things that we had upstairs, and of course we have things of England and things of this. And this was this house that he lived in Abingdon with his mother. And this is the portrait. I mean, that's kind of a pretty. It was actually done for Jim's mother's 80th birthday, but when she received it, and she said, "What's all that soot all over your face?" You can see how it's got. The artist was capturing Jim's mood, which was kind of dour at that point. He was having a bad year in 72. That wasn't the best moment for him.
And who's the artist?
The artist is Bob Barbie, and he was a colleague at the University of Virginia. And we have 2 names for this portrait. Jim had 2 different ideas about this. So one name for the portrait is Man in Blue Socks. And the reason is he never had those blue socks. I mean, he did have the pants up until about 10 years ago. And then if you look in the back, there's a little kitty cat, and that was Needles. This cat was named Needles. But Jim's, another kind of funny name he had for the portrait is because Jim's last name is Cox and Pussy. So those are supposed to be little jokes. But no, the whole apartment is full of things from Jim's past.
Wonderful. We kind of talked a little bit in our first interview about some other people we should know about or talk about, and you've
Right.
mentioned a few here.
Right.
I'm not familiar with Jamie Morey. Are there
Yeah,
any?
I don't know if they'd want to be interviewed or not. I mean, I could reach out to them for you if you like and let them know. I mean, because their story is very interesting. They've been in a solid, committed relationship. They're married, and they live on Gaston Street, and they are close friends or personal friends of mine. I'd be glad to ask them for you because I think it would be an interesting story. I don't know the whole story, but I know that we met them in '89, the year before we moved here. They were just arrived that year, so they got here a year before us.
Very nice. Is there anybody else that
So
we
I
should
mentioned
talk about?
Porter, who's passed away, and Alvin Neely. Albert Wall, I don't know again if he'd want to be interviewed or not, but he has a house on Liberty Street, 128 East Liberty. It's a bed and breakfast. He's a close friend of mine. I don't think he would have a problem being interviewed. Those are the people I can think of that are still living right now.
Very nice. So that's about it for my questions. Is there anything else that you'd like us to talk about or to
Well,
touch
I'm just
on?
going to say that I was really glad to be asked to do this. The first interview I'm a little embarrassed about because I'd been drinking at a Pride event. I wasn't aware that the city was doing these archival recordings. I do think it's important that I'm so glad the city is recording this history, this Savannah history. And in that first recording, I'm just a little embarrassed about it because I kept asking questions about what did you ask me, but that was probably because I'd had a few cocktails. So I'm glad to have the follow-up and when I could just speak to you in sort of normal frame of mind. And thank you for doing it. It was really great.
Yeah, well, thanks for talking to us. We
Okay,
appreciate
great.
it.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.